Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is the 16th 75K tutorial. I almost said 40K. And this is a PhaseOne sound. And it sounds like this. Now, the guy that requested this he basically said the main bass and the drop. And this is actually very interesting because there's a lot of sounds. And by the way, this is the sound that I got. Just in case you don't care about everything I'm about to say. If you listen to the drop. Here, right off the bat, like if you're not like super like into the sound design, a lot of that will probably sound like it might actually have been the same sound, with a couple noticeable exceptions, like this sound being very different from the surrounding sounds. And then that guy too, you know. But like this guy, you might be forgiven for thinking this guy and like this guy are the same sound, and that guy, like that guy, and like that guy. They might be made in some similar ways, but they're not the same sound. In fact, a lot of things in here aren't the same sound the way they might sound like they are the same sound. If they are the same sound, then this guy is a goddamn genius. But it's extraordinarily more likely that these are all just individual sounds, which is not necessarily, you know, a bad thing. But point being is that I didn't know which one was the main one, because a lot of them share pretty equal time. So I picked the one that I found the most interesting, which was that guy. Now, I'm a little bit in doubt as to how this one was made, at least in the way that I went about it. I mean, not just for the stranger things that I'm going to show you about how I did what I did, but just in the basic concept. My first thought about something like this is that this was done using some kind of vocoding. Except that you might think yourself that it sounds a bit too sharp, because vocoding doesn't usually sound that sharp. But there's actually reasons for that, and there's reasons why I got around that in my particular example. To make it still have I mean, it still kind of sounds vocody, but it doesn't sound nearly as diminished as it usually does. Because usually what happens when you put a sharp sound in a vocoder is that there's some feedbacky, ringy business that happens as a result of the way the bands move. Not unlike what happens when you put a phaser on very high feedback. But so like this might have just been a sound. Like if you use Serum has, thank you Facebook, Serum has built-in ring modulation and amplitude modulation, which are same but different. But that could definitely accomplish something like this with the right table. That was actually the first thing that I thought to do. But I'm not nearly as proficient with Serum as I am with the kind of shenanigans I engage in here. So I'm doing what I'm more comfortable with. So let's get to the actual what's going on down here. So if you've seen me do any kind of similar sound design, you've seen me this beginning position makes a lot of sense. I have a mess going on in the first operator. There's some crazy way I really wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and then FMing it with operator 2 to make just the worst sound. It's sharp and bad, and like I'm going to show you what it sounds like just so that you understand what I'm talking about. You know, just turn it there and turn it way the hell down, and disable the ring modulation for a second. And I have some unison on, which is actually super duper unusual for doing what I'm doing here because of this whole concept of the sharpness. And then it's being ring modulated. And the ring modulation cuts it down. It gets created this shape. Using, you know, the various, just move around the shapes, and also use the half and even mode up here to make it so that it's only the top half, which is essentially amplitude modulation, because we're not doing negative and positive, we're just doing positive. This is essentially only letting the waveform through for the duration of this shape. Ring modulation is the same as frequency modulation, except that instead of altering pitch, it alterates volume. And unlike FM, it's direct with its shape. It's a direct modulation, and not some kind of half sideways thing like FM and phase. So this is allowing that going through for about 1 second, which makes it sound really, really, really sharp. And you can kind of see that it's doing that in the recording the other guy. This idea, you can see how they go, and as it gets lower pitch, you can see that there's like straight holes in the sound that are saying that like half of it's on, half of it's off, which creates it to be very sharp. But you can do that with Serum pretty easily. So that's that sound, and then it gets distorted, and then there's a phaser going on here, and it's actually pretty light, and I'm modulating it directly, the max depth pretty directly. And then sticking on the same stages, but then the dry is also going into the vocodex, and that's the carrier. The modulator is a pretty typical you know, almost triangle wave with a higher harmonic, which makes it sound talky and that kind of thing. It's a higher pitch, which makes it sort of sound like a higher format characteristic, but I'm bringing it pretty far down using the pitch modulator inside Vocodex. Because you wanted to have extra modulation, which you can move around, you can mess around with that guy. That sounds pretty cool. The kicker here is that I'm also ring modulating this modulator. So with this shape, so it's a bit more either or than that kind of thing. And here is the reason why a sharp carrier doesn't necessarily always sound sharp in the Vocodex. And that's because if the modulator is not sharp, the modulator has this sort of smearing activity from the motion of the bands. The bands are moving according to the behavior of the modulator. I discovered this a long time ago when I put in a granulized sound into Vocodex. I made a how to base about this a while ago. And it ended up creating a very sharp, very like cut and spaced out like that kind of sound. And I noticed that it was still sharp, despite the fact that the carrier wasn't sharp, and that we're using Vocodex. It was absolute in how I cut the modulator was being perceived by the bands. So this means that Vocodex, while it's not good at maintaining the sharpness of a carrier, it absolutely maintains the sharpness of a modulator. So we're creating the synth that creates like this kind of thing. I really don't know how you would do this. I guess you could do it in Serum. Actually, it wouldn't be that hard to do that if you want to have a modulator with sharpness, because then you'd make the modulator into a wavetable, and then you'd ring modulate it from B. So in A, you'd have the wavetable record of the modulation, and then in B, you'd have the ring modulation, and then that would create the sharpness, and it would be the benefit of this is that the notes are controlled in both of them. So that means the ring modulation is going to be the speed of the note without any kind of like special calculations or anything like that. So it's pretty handy, and that's why I like doing this. Yeah, and then okay, so without this here is essentially higher frequency distortion. I'm distorting the higher frequencies, and then I'm EQing them out a bit, and that adds the extra kind of crunch. That's what it sounds like straight out of Vocodex with some compression, and then with a distortion. So it's there to just kind of beef it up a bit. The compression is fairly nominal. I didn't do much on the low end, and I also don't have a separate. I'm not recovering the low end out of this. I'm expecting that if someone's going to use the sound like this, they're gonna need a separate sub. And just in case you don't care about that, I'll just do that yourself. Congratulations. You can just come in here and come down, and then just cut. Goodbye. Yeah. So this is super nuancy in the way that I'm doing it like this, because there's a lot of moving parts, which means that any parameter of any part of this changing even a little bit alters the sound in pretty drastic ways. But I'm still a little unclear as to how the original was done. I mean, that might not have been vocoding at all. That might have been a sound that just has that quality of sharpness already, and then filtering. You know, I can kind of almost sort of hear like a flanger going on in there. That kind of like delay-based phasing effect, flanger, phasers, delay. Like all those things that cause that effect. And I'm more tempted to believe that because this sound barely has any airtime. Like it's there and it's in between things, and it's usually after something else. Like this, that's a different sound. But because of the contrast it makes, and the very correct like togetherness of that everything kind of has, it sounds like it's the same thing, and it sounds an awful lot like there's more going on with the sound than there really is in the song. So it could be something super complicated like that, like direct phase control. But as you see, it's basically the same thing the whole time. And in fact, now that I'm looking at it, okay, so they're different. I was looking at this guy and this guy, because I was just thinking that this might actually be sourced from a sample, and this is, I mean, you could have made a sample and then just like used it to do that every now and then, because it's basically like that guy and this guy. They're different enough, but you can see kind of similar shapes in the motion of whatever filters are happening in there. So it's the school of thought of creating variations in small changes and that kind of thing over time. So that's handy to think about. Let's also use sparingly. And this sort of analyzing this kind of stuff will also help you figure out like what you want to do in terms of arrangement to make stuff like this work. Because a big part of how these things happen has, I mean, the sound design is wonderful and cool and all that, but using it is altogether a different thing. And it's these kinds of tricks where like some sort of similar sounds or sounds that are different enough, but still like related in enough way, makes it sound like it's like, you know, they're all related in different sounds, as opposed to having a whole bunch of sounds that sound like noticeably different at all times. There's a, you know, pick and choose, whichever you feel like doing. Anyway, I'll put up this FLP for download. If you'd like to make a request yourself, please do so in the Reddit thread. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And I'll make a request at the Reddit thread. Requests made anywhere else will be ignored. And as usual, have a nice day.